Hi, welcome. This is our latest episode of CCYP's Shaping the Cape video podcast series. I'm Lauren Barker. I'm the CEO of CCYP, and I'm excited today to cover the topic of housing on Cape Cod with some really excellent special guests here from the Cape. Before we let them introduce themselves, I want to first thank our sponsor for this series on policy updates. We've done 3 now. This is our 3rd. On different policy-related topics that impact young people here on the Cape. And our sponsor, the Cape and Islands Association of Realtors, has been really wonderful to support this series. So thank you so much to them. So today we're going to be talking about how the lack of attainable year-round housing has been a barrier to keeping and attracting a young workforce on the Cape. And I'm joined by a couple of special guests. So I'm going to turn it over first to Ryan Castle of the Association of Realtors to introduce himself. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Lauren. My name is Ryan Castle. I'm the CEO of the Cape Cod and Islands Association of Realtors and Multiple Listing Service, and also the immediate past president of Cape Cod Young Professionals.
Awesome. Glad you could be here. A great local expert on housing and the market, and there's lots going on with that we'll get into. Yeah. And turn it over to Alisa Magnotta, CEO of Housing Assistance Corporation. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. It's going to be a lively discussion. Every conversation with Ryan's always lively. I have been the CEO of Housing Assistance Corporation since 2017, so about 3.5 or so years. And we are what I like to say, one stop for all things housing. So we have 1,200 clients who live in a Section 8 subsidy. We also have the contract for RAFT, which is rental assistance stabilization for low-income families. We also have a weatherization, energy and weatherization department. So we go in and help modify the insulation and utilities to keep the expense down for folks in the region. And we also have people who go out and specifically seek out individuals who are literally homeless, living in the car, living in the woods, and connect them to services, connect them to housing. Along with that, we run 4 family shelters. So we have 4 shelters that when school's in session fully, the school bus stops, picks up the kids, takes them to school, and brings them back. It's pretty heart-wrenching, but also amazing because we give them a fresh start, a place to put their lives back together, get jobs, get housing, and re-enter society. So it's actually really transformative and a special gift that we can give people at a hard time. So, and then on top of that, we build housing and we have a real estate department. So, we, like I said, it's one stop. There's our goal is to meet people where they are and help them live the life they want to live. And that all starts with the foundation of a house and a safe, affordable place to live. Yeah.
And I love HAC's messaging. We'll call Housing Assistance Corp HAC throughout the conversation today. Those that we'll make sure and define our acronyms here, but just the definition of housing as that foundational aspect of a person's life. A lot of what you've done recently around the COVID-19 pandemic has been related to keeping people housed. Our workforce, of course, is the big piece of that work that you're doing with a special fund that's actually directed specifically for the workforce and the needs that we have around housing during this time. So a lot of really awesome work being done there, and we're really glad to have you on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. We saw that with the pandemic, more than ever, we see the link between healthcare and our economy and housing. And so this seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to help make those connections for our community and be an aggregator of resources that we can help get out the door to people in need.
Yeah, it is all very interconnected, and I think that you can't talk about just one piece of it without bleeding into the other parts as well of a person's life and all the different things that they may need or have to sustain a life. But certainly housing is one of the most critical and sort of the basic needs level that has to be met before you can move up that chain. So, I mean, housing, of course, important for individuals. Why is it important for you? I want to talk with each of you about how you got into this work, you know, what motivates you to do what you do. So let's
Yeah.
start.
So, at the Association of Realtors, what we do is we really work. People try to say, well, what is that? And I go, it's really just professionalizing and advocating for the real estate industry. Our members are the realtors that help people buy, sell, appraise property, commercial, residential, and all that in between. And so what we try to do is say, you know what are the barriers to living and working on Cape Cod? What are the barriers to our members' business? What are the barriers to helping people attain home ownership? Because we fundamentally believe, and our members don't get into this business to help people buy and sell houses to make money. They get in it because they firmly believe, and the joy, and Alisa, you've seen this, the joy of someone buying their first house or obtaining home ownership is a joy that can't be replicated. That pride, that passion, that feeling you have when it's yours, and there's a lot that goes into that, and a lot of what we'll talk today may not be home ownership related, but it's all on the path to get someone to home ownership, and we'll talk about. And so I think that I was attracted to, I've been at the Cape Cod Association of Realtors for 6 years as the CEO. Prior to that, I spent 6 years as the lobbyist for the Charleston, South Carolina Association of Realtors, and really there as well, the same type of work, that advocacy work on behalf of home ownership and homeowners and helping people attain home ownership. And really just that's always drawn to me. I knew some guys in college that worked as lobbyists for the Association of Realtors, and it always had called me, whether it was my prior careers in journalism or in public service, and then over to the Association of Realtors, always working on real estate related stuff and housing related stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I actually didn't know you had a background in journalism, so I learned something new too.
Yeah. That's why he's so smart and likes to like dig into those issues, you know. He's got, like, that curious
No, I mean,
mind.
and that's what it takes to advocate, is to dig
Yeah.
in and be able to. And we had a great conversation on the podcast last week about advocacy and the need for, you know, really that education piece is key to understand the issue that you're talking about. But there's a lack of that info out there sometimes, which we can also discuss a bit today. So Alisa, what about you? How did you get into this work? What motivates you to do this?
So I have been in the nonprofit sector for, I can't believe I can say this now, like 20 years. I switched over from the for-profit sector. I started as a volunteer, actually living in Los Angeles, working at an arts education school that provided arts education to homeless children. And I just got the bug. I got the fire in my belly to be able to link my professional skills with the output of my work, right? Like, so that my work had meaning. And my personal mission is to provide the opportunity or empower people to live the life that's meaningful to them. So in all my jobs, there's always a component of empowerment or really facilitating change or presenting an opportunity for transformation for people. And I worked at Gosnold, and then I was the head of Alzheimer's services for several years. And here, it put all the pieces together. You know, it's so much of what we see in our most fragile clients, the people who need the most help from us, are people who have mental health challenges, who have addiction issues, who have lived with systemic or generational poverty. And so the obstacles that they have to overcome are more than just get a place to live or is it affordable. There's a lot of other components that make it a very complex decision tree and complex services to really help someone move along in the trajectory of a meaningful life. But none of that, you can't live a meaningful life if you don't have a place to live. You got to have that starting ground. So for me, it was really taking me back to my roots and my core values, and really, again, just linking the professional skills that I have with the passion to be able to get output that's meaningful to me and to our community.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. And I don't know about the two of you, but I feel like just in the last, and I have a long history of coming to the Cape but then living here the last few years, I do feel like there's been a shift in the last maybe 3 to 5 year time frame in terms of the awareness of this issue of housing and how it impacts, our entire community, across all different, categories and types and backgrounds and everything. And so I think that, CCYP has repeatedly found in our needs survey research that housing continues to be an issue for young people who want to sustain a life here and work here on the Cape year round. And we released, as you both know, and actually Ryan was instrumental as the president of CCYP in pulling this together, housing policy position for CCYP to try to pinpoint some of those ways that we can start to move the needle, so to speak, on this very complex issue of housing, because it is, as you mentioned, Alisa, so complex, and there's so many different interrelated pieces that you can't just talk about housing.
Right.
You start to talk about lots of other things as well. So these three kind of big categories identified in that policy position were looking at zoning, the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, and down payment assistance. And these are all, I think at first glance, for anyone who's not kind of in the world of housing or local civic issues, you might read these things and kind of gloss over and not really understand what's behind them. I mean, I think it'd be great to sort of hear each of you talk about those three kind of areas and any progress that you've seen over the last few years, why they're important, and just your thoughts on where we are now versus where we.
So,
if we're still recording, if Ryan can help me here, but
yeah.
The
so,
one thing I have a question for you, Ryan, because this is something that I think is important to in the shaping of policy and talking about policy, is why should people care? Why should we care about that anyone has a place to live, right? Like, I got my house, figure it out. And there are some real systemic issues that why we should all care that people have housing, and why our workforce has housing, and why our young professionals have housing. And I know, Ryan, you've done a good job of changing that conversation, and we've piggybacked on that as well, because there are real issues that impact all of us, no matter your age, your race, what town you live in, that if we don't have stable housing for people, there are detrimental consequences.
And CCYP was the first big driver. Lauren, you say 3 to 5 years. You since you've been here, you've noticed that housing's always top conversation. It hasn't always been that way on Cape. Yep, and it was a lot of work by a lot of people to get it that way. Yep. And CCYP led that way with their Shape the Cape study that identified that. And I think people knew it as well, but putting a face to it, right? Like, and that's really the important thing, I think, is that you realize, like, when we actually look at the numbers, they're startling. When you look at the fact that people say, oh, well, there's plenty of houses out there because I drive past them and see them all day. And that's just anecdotal information, right? That's just, oh, I see people here or this or that. Like, and every time I bring up in planning board meetings and stuff like that, someone that needs housing, well, let's help that person. And it needs to be a broader discussion. And Alisa sees, like, Kate, her organization does case management to help individual people, but we got to help the broader community. And the broader community is because, quite honestly, employers have a hard time getting employees and, to afford the cost of housing. So, with the cost of housing and the why it's so high on the Cape compared to incomes, like, that's what you got to realize, is that the gap between the cost of housing and incomes is widespread for a variety of reasons. Land costs are more, regulatory costs are more. There's more competition than just year-round housing buyers. So it's all three kind of layered together. Some people say, oh, well, regulation's so tough, or we're near the beach, the land's so high, or there's the demand from second home buyers. It's not one or the other, it's all three of those layered together. But then again, at the end of the day, all three of those kind of create our economy as well. And so it's more nuanced than that. And that's why CCYP kind of broke down their housing policy into kind of 3 bites of the apple to get people eventually to home ownership.
Yep.
Yeah. Because this is also happening in a national context where housing in general has gone up in price, production has gone down. We've seen a generation gap when it comes to the ability to buy and own a home. The difference between the baby boomer generation and the millennials, of course, everybody knows this now. It's becoming more, and I think, again, you look at like the last 5 years and there's been a major shift in the awareness, but also in how acute and big this problem has become. And I think that, that's good and it's bad. There's awareness, but also it's getting to a point where it's very hard to take those bite-sized pieces out and make a big difference.
But I think it's structural and institutional in some respects. And in light of everything going on in this country right now, we need to recognize that, right? Like, I come from a privileged view of this. Like, I always grew up in a house that my parents owned. Since 25, I've owned my own house, right? Like, and so I've never had a problem for attaining housing. And so since I've never been in that situation, and many of our residents have never been in that situation for at least 20 or 30 years, that may have lived on the Cape for some time or lived somewhere else for some time, have not that housing insecure feeling. And I hope Alisa can talk a little about what she hears from her clients at her organization about the housing insecureness and those fostering those feelings. Like, I'm coming from that privileged area where I've never had to worry about those feelings.
Right, and the employers, as you were saying, that if the impact and the consequences, that if the employers can't find employees, so they have to pay more to attract them, that means the prices are going to pass through to all of us, right? Stop and shop and gas and.
But it's not just those, right? Like, it's the bank teller, it's the nurse, it's the, like, my wife's a nurse, and on a single income, she would not be able to find a place to live on Cape Cod. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. And that's, people will say, oh, no, that's not true. No, it is absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we have structural policies in place that are restricting the amount of housing that can be built. And no one wants it to look like New Jersey or, destroy our environment, right? But there are policies that were developed before we lived here that continue and have a stronghold on how housing is built, that we need to really peel back the onion and think about. And it's not fun, it's not sexy, and it's not fast, but it will make a difference if we can start peeling the onion back and start changing some of these policies so they're more thoughtful for the reality of what we're dealing with today. How much people make, how much land do we actually have available to build on? What are the needs for a vibrant year-round economy for our workers, our workforce, our employers, just our community in general? And if we can have a holistic approach and view, we can start to get those tactics in place that can make some changes and be somewhat disruptive to get some more inventory in the marketplace. But it takes time and engagement, and in this fast-paced world, that's hard, right? It's hard to get people's attention long enough, but that's really what
and especially to build housing, right? Because the things we're talking about, Alisa, are changes we're going to make at a town meeting level now that will not see a single unit built from that for 4 years.
Exactly. I mean, so it's incremental change, but it has to be thought about, going to the root cause, and then letting the consequences fall into place and let the market respond. Because if we keep going the way we are, with the pressure on the environment, construction costs going up, limiting land use, we're going to have less land, which is going to mean even higher prices, which means really, if you start playing that out, the only people that can afford the highest priced housing in our country are rich white people, most of them retired. So, you know, we start talking about, you know, systemic racism or oppression or the consequences of some of the policies. That's what's happening. If we keep perpetuating the same, we're going to keep getting more of the same. And that's where we can start chipping away at change and chipping away at making it more accessible to other people, young people.
There's a lot, yeah, and there's a lot at stake with that. I think that, you know, you've both very eloquently put how it doesn't just impact the individual who is unable to buy a house. It's bigger than that. You have the cost of living, you have the ability for local employers to fill their vacancies. We have so many small businesses here on the Cape. It's 90%, I believe, of our businesses are classified as small businesses. So when you think about the impact of that and the inability to fill those vacancies and what that cost looks like to a small business owner, it becomes really crushing to not just to the individual who can't afford the house year round, but to the whole community and the well-being long term.
But then it also raises the cost for everyone else, right? Like that's the issue, right? Like even those that can afford housing are paying higher in, for example, childcare costs because of the lack of ability of workers, because they can't pay workers enough to live here, so they can't get workers, and so they end up paying workers more. So I'm paying more in childcare even though I can afford my own home, right? And so like whether it's banking or whether it's insurance or whether it's, you know, going out to eat or the grocery store, you end up paying higher in cost of goods and services to then pay for the people to live here.
Yep.
Yeah.
In school, right? You know, you start playing that out where you don't have young professionals who are filling our schools. Then we have the teachers, you know, that we have to have classrooms for, and that we start talking about the quality of the education and the number of teachers needed, and you have a smaller pool of people that are paying for it. Pretty soon it starts to not make sense. But if it doesn't make sense, then you have to look out even further and say, well, then do we even have a society? Like, what are we going to become, a museum that people just come and visit and leave? You know, like we have to be thinking about the consequences of following it all the way through. It is complex.
But don't let anyone clean your hotel room or your short-term rental when you're here on vacation, though, to come see that museum.
Right.
So let's talk about like the composition of our housing picture on the Cape, because I think you both have really interesting perspectives and maybe slightly different ones on this in some ways. But you know, a lot of the time I hear people say things like, well, there's so many houses, we already have too many. You know, look how dense a lot of these towns are. Why do we need more housing? Why do we need, you know, places for young people to live? Look around, there's plenty of places for them to live. So what's really happening here when you, like you said, Alisa, peel back that onion? You know, I think this touches on aspects of what CCYP pinpointed in our policy position, you know, in terms of zoning and the accessory dwelling units, but it's also, there's a little bit more to it than that in terms of the composition and that. Yeah.
So when you talk about houses for sale, like just what's been built that's available to buy, because like I can't go buy a house that's not for sale, right? I mean, you look at that, we're at record lows for the last 25 years right now, and COVID has exacerbated that even further. So about 1,450 single family homes for sale in Barnstable County, another 450 or so condos. So you end up with less than 2,000 properties for sale right now, which makes it a what we call absorption rate, the amount of time it would take to sell everything on the market, 3 months, 3.5 months, which a healthy market is usually of enough inventory is 6 to 9. Well, how do we get that low? How we get that low is that we don't have new inventory. And so when you don't have new housing coming on the market, you don't end up adding to that inventory and helping balance that supply and demand. And as such, you continue to have the same amount of demand, or in our stamp, decreased demand and decreased supply. And the reason why is because you have people not willing to move, you have people in great interest rates for 30 years fixed. You have no house. It's also a cyclical cycle. You're building no housing, so you're creating no housing for them to move into and sell their existing house and move up and create that kind of flow of inventory. And so from the existing home market, you're going to continue to see rising prices until we can introduce new construction and new inventory in to help stem that tide.
Because there needs to be movement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
A couple of years ago, like four years ago, we saw our client base change. This is saying the same thing that Ryan said, but just the human side of it for a second, just like what we've seen in the client side of it, just because it mirrors, it's identical, really. We started having clients come into our office who were stable, who had lived in the same house for 10 plus years, who had the same job for 10 plus years. They were stably employed, made enough money. They were being evicted because the house had sold and the new owner wanted to rent it seasonally. So
or a true second home.
Well, most of them wanted to rent it seasonally, and then have it available throughout the year, because that we're considered a safe investment, right? It still was reasonably priced. It's too high for most of us who live here, but it's reasonably priced for a second home or somebody who's making a lot of money in another place to be able to come here, buy this house, rent it out through Airbnb, which was, made it very easy to rent your home, right? And play matchmaker like that. And what it did is it took the pressure and increased the pressure on the year-round population, where we used to be able to rent for 9 months, right, and limp along through the summer, and then jump back into a property. Most of the 9-month rentals are gone. Most of that kind of limping along doesn't really happen anymore, because people don't have the same kind of access to inventory and housing, because most of it has flipped to a seasonal, to a second homeowner who wants to rent it seasonally, or who's going to use it more regularly, or a mixture of the two.
It's a victim of a good economy, right? We've had a strong economy nationwide for 10 years, and so people had extra cash, and so they don't need that 9-month rental to sustain that ownership anymore either.
And it's an investment.
They don't need the winter rental, right?
Right,
Like,
so
because
it's part of their investment portfolio.
Yeah, they're better. They have more stable income elsewhere, and so they don't necessarily need that. And then you have the landlord-tenant issues where they don't want someone over 6 months to get into the eviction proceedings in Massachusetts. And so that Cape Cod shuffle doesn't really exist as much anymore as it did 10 years ago. And I think people forget, all the time, this is 2020, not 2010 anymore.
Yeah, right. So starting to think about, okay, to Ryan's point exactly, is in the meantime, while the marketplace has shifted, right? Good economy, safe investment, beautiful, desirable place to live. Second home can be part of the investment portfolio. Makes perfect sense, right? Makes perfect sense why somebody would want to buy a house here. But we as a community didn't keep up with adding the inventory, as Ryan's saying. So it has created this extreme pressure on year-round rentals to the point where we're less than 1% of a vacancy rate. We should be at like 5 to 7, right? There is no movement. There is no diversity in the size of the housing or the pricing of the housing. And so that creates a lot of pressure and increases the expense. I mean, there's just no way around it. So trying to figure out, how can we add inventory? What are the policies and the financial things that we can do to try to incentivize the market to create enough housing that we can at least keep up with, or try to keep up with, the trend of what's happening around us, instead of being reactionary.
Right. Because you've got sort of multiple angles that are all combining together for this perfect storm situation. So the historically low inventory for purchasing a house, but simultaneously you have all these year-round rentals that are disappearing. And I remember, moving here and looking for a year-round rental, and where do you find one? There's not a search engine. There's not a website for that. For anyone watching, if you looked for that, you're not dreaming. It does
not you.
exist. There's not a Cape Cod year-round rentals website. We had talked, a number of years ago about creating one. I think the hard part of that is, what would you put on it? It's all by word of mouth, and we share them on our website when we find them, but it's very, very difficult to find those year-round rental opportunities. And so that foothold opportunity to get into the housing market here, what many people do when they move to a new place, get a rental to tide you over for the first year while you figure out buying a house potentially, or you stay renting, and those opportunities are quickly disappearing. And
I did that as well, right? Like I moved here 6 years ago, and we did a winter rental, and we were going to rent year round. And, even as the CEO of the Association of Realtors, I couldn't find anything year round, even at a higher price level than most people can afford to rent year round, and ended up being into buying.
Yeah.
It's a great investment, but, wasn't the right time for us to buy, but we bought because that was our option.
Yeah, and I think those stories need to be told too, where it doesn't, I remember hearing years ago there, just the power of hearing a story from someone who, like you, Ryan, you head up an organization that works on housing, and you couldn't find a I think that is very telling, and I hope that at very least it gives people some degree of, I don't know if it's comfort, but at least to, an understanding of the severity of what we're up against here when it comes to young people and people in general being able to afford.
Right. And you can see how, like, their personal preservation, right? You're a 30-something-year-old, and you're trying to choose between a job and a lifestyle and building a life. Why are you going to work that hard to find a place to live when you can move to another town with, a lot of career opportunities and movement and housing that might not be capital A affordable, but it's affordable for how much money you make, or you at least have options.
It's available.
Right, you have options. So
period. Yeah.
It's one of the things I say when people say, well, they should just work harder. Work harder. It's a totally different environment and economy, and no 30-year-old is gonna put their own self-interest. No person, our client, no person is gonna put their own self-interest aside. Everyone is going to try to preserve what's best for them. And so trying to give people a landscape to be able to make good decisions that work for them and work for our community and work for our economy, that's where the linkage with housing comes in.
And so that's where CCYP's position comes in, right? And their policy position is that the two of the three legs of the stool we talk about, one is the down payment assistance programs, and we don't really have anything of substance on the Cape for down payment assistance like other areas around the country do. And one of the problems why that's so important is because they're paying, because the lack of rental inventory is so scarce, prices are much higher, and as such they're not able to save.
Well,
and they're not able to save for that home ownership, and that's where that down payment assistance comes in. And then also the down payment assistance comes in that their offer to buy a house looks better when you have more money to put down, when you're competing against higher down payments and more cash buyers from second home buyers. And so that's where I think as a community, we need to get more serious about, one, down payment assistance programs, and two is, I'll commend him, is Senator Julian Sear. Before he even ran for Senate, he sat down with me and said, what's the one thing I could actually propose to help people buy houses on the Cape, for first-time home buyers, young professionals? I said, first-time home buyer tax credit bill. And he said, okay, and he made that his very first bill he filed. And what that would do is that would allow you, basically like a health savings account that you may be familiar with. It allows you to put money aside in an account, allows other people to, even in your family, give you money into that account yearly. And basically it's state income tax free. So 5% tax income free in Massachusetts, it would be if it was passed at the state level, where you're basically, instead of saying you put $2,000 away a year, that's 5% savings on that money you would have. Granted, the bigger nut is the federal one, the federal income tax, and hopefully once as many states, I mean, over 20 states have enacted the first-time home buyer savings accounts for their local bills. If we can get enough states to do it, the Congress will say, okay, let's do this at the federal level too to help. And so I think that's like a one tangible piece that would help people save right away.
Well, going back to the down payment assistance, those programs are extremely expensive and time consuming to run. We run them in a couple of towns, and the hoops that we have to jump through to income qualify and manage and find the house is administratively a burden, honestly. We don't get paid the staff time to run the program, so that's one piece that has to be changed. But the second piece is towns don't give enough for the down payment assistance because the people have to income qualify. So their $50,000 for a down payment assistance isn't going to change the outcome of the person being able to buy the house. We have to be at about $150,000 for that down payment assistance to make, because it's got to be affordable. It's not just, at least the way the programs are run now, it can't just be like, just get the house. It's got to be then affordable beyond that. So there's some changes that we can make.
Do you mean it has to be classified affordable, like as we say, big A affordable?
Yeah,
so
in some programs, not all of them, but some.
Or you have to be income restricted. Well, if you're income restricted, you're not going to be able to buy the house, even with the subsidy, right?
Exactly.
Because it's talking about 80% of area median income, right? Instead of looking at the people that you can actually get into home ownership, which is that, and this is a big point, I think. If you looked at that 110 to 150% of area median income bracket and help them get into home ownership, well, where did they live somewhere now?
Right.
That
So you're going
to free up that year-round rental housing to allow that 70 to 100% of area median income to move into that year-round rental housing, and it frees it all up. So if towns would just focus on that middle income, that young professional, 110 to 150% in home buyer in down payment savings. And the other thing, Alisa, is that we need to think more globally about putting into a fund together, Cape-wide, for down payment assistance, because while, you know, the town cares whether you buy in Dennis or Yarmouth or Brewster, the young professional doesn't necessarily, right? Like I live in Yarmouth Port and I go to frequent Dennis businesses more than I frequent Yarmouth businesses. I might not want to say that, but I do. And so like, because I'm so close to the line, right? Like I don't care about the lines, but the towns do. But the towns should recognize even putting me a little bit on the other side of the line still benefits the dentist businesses. And so I think, you know, looking more globally at that, and then also the issue of just qualify people, give them the money. And like right now, you said the hoops, like I know some programs, you have to take the offer of purchase back to the committee that's approving it and the house that you want to buy and all that. And as such, there's so many hoops that there's another offer on the table by the time that all happens. And so if we could restructure a home buyer savings account, home buyer down payment assistance on Home Cape, we start doing some good work by putting CPA money toward where it's supposed to go.
Yep, exactly.
And I think we have also the issue of those qualifying income levels. You know, we've talked about, and those familiar with the issue may know the term, the missing middle. A lot of our young professionals into this category have those federal income levels that qualify people for affordable housing that's classified affordable, and they are not, you know, a level where both, if you have a two-person income household, you're making that number.
Right, or if you don't make that number, right, you don't make enough to qualify to buy the house. So we can't have it both. You can't have it both ways, where right now a household has to be making over $100,000 a year in order to afford a $400,000 house. So you can't, that's not going to qualify for affordable. Like affordable means that they're making 60,000, 70,000, 80,000. That means that they're going to qualify for the
Right,
capital
it's
A affordable stuff.
90, about
Nothing that's for sale.
90,000.
And nothing that's for sale, right? And nothing,
Right.
and no
and I'll say
down
this, and
payment's gonna gap it. You know, it's
I'll
not
say
gonna
this,
work.
like Hyannis worked with the town of Barnstable worked with the federal government to create a really great home buyers down payment assistance program in the town, like other than the fact of the income requirements, right? Because the income requirements allowed them to buy a house that was a certain value, okay? Has been since the enactment of the program, like less than 10 houses to ever even qualify for that bracket. So like they're designing programs and not looking at what's available to buy.
Right.
And that becomes the problem.
Right.
And so if you go, but the Cape Cod Commission in their own housing study showed this, right? Like people say, oh, well, if I want to, like, I know the developers have said, oh, I'll build this development and it'll be $450,000 to $600,000 housing. And people say, well, that's not affordable. Why are we going to approve that? And I'm like, because the Cape Cod Commission study shows that building housing at all levels of income and all price points will relieve the pressure beneath it. Kind of like I just illustrated by you getting that person making 130% of median income into a house they own. It frees up their rental unit for someone else to take. And so what we know is building housing at all income levels for all income levels frees up housing at all income levels below it.
Yep.
This is the movement we were talking about earlier, where you have, you know, for example, you have a senior living in a house on a single acre lot that's got 4 or 5 bedrooms, and they want to downsize. You know, where do they go to do? And so that movement, you know, where you could free up a single family home, or, you know, some of these other solutions that have been identified could be implemented.
Build an accessory dwelling unit, move into the
That's,
accessory
I was just
dwelling
about to
That gets into the
say.
next piece of, you know, CCYP's policy is this ADU, right? And, you know, a movement started several years ago, because when I got to the Cape and started talking to everyone, it seemed like the easiest piece everyone talked about was, well, why don't we just allow more accessory dwelling units? For those that don't know, you might think of them as in-law apartments or garage apartments or carriage houses, a lot of things like that. We've called them over the years. And if you look back at traditionally how Cape Cod was developed, if you look down 6A, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them down 6A. The little cottages on properties, carriage houses, above garage apartments, that kind of stuff. And so somewhere along the lines, we said that's no longer allowed anymore. And so we've had a movement led by a lot of organizations over the last several years to expand it, and we're over halfway through every town. But even every town's has the perfect ADU bylaw, and there's hurdles. Now, when you get to towns like Brewster or Harwich, who have the better ADU bylaws that are on the books now, you're seeing some units created. But like we said, Alisa, it's going to take years from the time you enact a zoning change to actually seeing fruition. So you can't just say, oh, and look at this town, in 6 months they haven't created more units. It takes time.
Well, and
it's one tool.
It's one tool. Yeah. In a bigger picture. And one of the other issues with the accessory dwelling units that we dug into was financing the construction of it. So you can't, if a house is deemed a single family home on their rate card, right, for taxes, they can't count the income of the rental towards servicing the debt to have the construction. So we had to reach out to Cape Cod 5 and First Citizens Credit Union and ask them to please develop a loan product that would allow a homeowner to use to count some of that rental income to be able to service the debt. Otherwise, again, you'd have to be rich and have the cash to be able to pull it out or the equity to be able to pull it out and take on that risk to build the accessory dwelling unit, which, you know, it doesn't have to be a lot of money, depends on the situation and the layout, but it's enough of an investment that you got to think twice. You got to hit the pause button and think about it, right? So
and everyone can find out more information about this at buildasmartercape.com. But one of the things about it is the way it's designed, and a lot of organizations work with the Cape Cod Commission to design a model bylaw that towns have modified to some extent. But the advantage of this is it doesn't actually change anything as relates to zoning or other, setbacks or other things that are already in place, or bedroom counts, right? Like a lot of our houses are on septics.
Yeah.
And so like you can't even go further than that. And so like it doesn't actually, like people try to say, oh, it's going to complain, it's going to make wastewater worse. No, it doesn't actually. It just better utilizes the already established bedrooms we have. I think the average house on Cape Cod over the last 20-25 years is down an entire person living there that was living there 25 years ago on average. And so let's take that extra person and put them in there as a single young professional living in a accessory dwelling unit to help use some of the existing stock, which makes so much more sense environmentally than having to go out and build a whole lot more housing and take away some more land.
Yeah, but Ryan, I mean, that's just honestly like fear mongering from the other side of like, really, we're going to have so many people moving here all of a sudden, clogging up the toilets that we're going to have a wastewater problem.
Absolutely.
No, that's not going to happen. So let's be
There are
real.
a lot of opposition. I mean, I think this is a great segue to talk a little bit about the civic engagement piece and the kind of engagement that you see around an issue like housing. Both people who are very much for that and people who are very much against it for a variety of reasons. And I think that HAC has done a lot of great work on, putting information out, and Build a Smarter Cape. I put the website up in the chat box, and we'll share that resource as well. All the arguments that you hear against building additional housing, it's going to increase the population, it'll increase congestion. I think that the core argument here is that the population's already here, living here, working here. It's making sure that there's sufficient housing opportunity to house the people who are already here, first and foremost, but you also have a need for additional as you.
Yeah. From our position, in all of us who live on the Cape, right? It's a beautiful place. We love it. And lived in Santa Cruz, California. I'm like the biggest tree hugger you're ever going to meet. And so this isn't us against them, but the thing that is unique about the Cape that really does require more conversation and really using a scalpel, not a hammer, to really understand the environmental impact that housing has on our wastewater, in our communities, on the vernal bogs, and coupled with what the need for it for our economy and our community and for our year-round way of life that we all want to preserve and protect. And that's what we've tried to do with our partnership with APCC, and looking at a map of Cape Cod and deciding together where is good for density, to have more than one house per lot, and where should we as housing advocates be staying away from building? Where can we agree on where to build and where not to build? So we're coming from a position of fact, we're coming from a united front, and I think that those more conversations like that are really important. And the blending of, like I said, the economy, the environment, housing, all of it it's not a special interest group that should prevail. It should be all of us really thinking about the beautiful place that we all want to live and raise our families and age in place. And what does that mean for the human side and the environmental side and the water side? But we as housing advocates have to get a little bit more organized so we can have a seat at the table for those conversations. Because climate change is real, right? And we do see the impact of that in our region. We have to take it seriously. And that group are very educated and they're very organized. But equally as important is the needs of the people. And so how do we get ourselves and keep ourselves organized and our voice at the table to ensure that we have places for people to live in the beautiful place that we're trying to protect as well.
Yeah, and that voice, that engagement piece is so key because, as we've touched on before, it's about showing up and about being part of that conversation, but often conversations, the visioning, the planning process, they happen at the very, very local level where it's not just a town meeting, it's a town planning board meeting or a town zoning board of appeals, or you have a vision community, to putting together a strategic plan. It's those meetings that having a variety of voices and perspectives it's just so key, because people will show up and steer the conversation, and you're either there or you're not. And
it's in the absolute most boring meetings.
It's
the most boring.
It's conservation commissions, health boards. Like, there's so many people that have pieces of it that can control that process.
Right.
That it's important to be on all of them. But I think, we talked about the two other pieces of the CCYP's housing position is the home buyer down payment savings accounts and things of that nature, and home access to buy a house, and then ADUs. But the big piece that we're all touching on, and we haven't mentioned, is the big structural change and what's designed. I mean, to steal Elizabeth Warren's comments, right? We need big structural change in this. I
love that you're quoting Elizabeth Warren. I'm going to write that down, Ryan. Ryan quoted.
First time ever, right? But the idea is that we need to change zoning. We have an entire zoning system built around, in today's present world, around stopping development. And I'll point this out, like, name the places you love the most about the Cape. Yep. Most people will name Osterville, Chatham, Provincetown, things like that, our village centers that you could not go back and rebuild today because zoning wouldn't allow it. Yep. And I always find that most fascinating. Those that know me know I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and I just remember Andres Duwani, who's a legendary land use planner, coming to Charleston and talking about, why do you guys have a zoning problem? He goes, because here's the problem. If a hurricane wiped out downtown Charleston today, you wouldn't be able to rebuild under your current zoning land regs. So the places you love, you don't allow to get built again. And that's really what the problem is with zoning again. And I think if you look at the places, and people want to say density is a bad word, Alisa, but talk about what the places people love and the most desirable places on the Cape to live with the housing, highest home prices: Chatham, Osterville, Provincetown. Right. The three most densest villages we have on the Cape are the places with the highest housing prices because they're desirable. And so I would say that, right? So density can be done right. And we've got to fundamentally rethink how we do zoning.
And I want to brag for a minute, because we just did our ribbon cutting on 8 units that we built on 3/4 of an acre. And I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this? That is, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's 3/4 of an acre, 8 apartment with a big garden in the front.
Yeah. So think about that's on Ridgewood Avenue in Hyannis. Yeah. Think about if every landowner on Ridgewood Avenue did that, right? Yeah. And
that's 3/4 of an acre.
You could easily create 20 more lots like that on Ridgewood Avenue, and as such, you could have 340 units with little pocket neighborhoods. Exactly. And create a walkable connection all the way down the spur of Hyannis. Like, we could be doing this if the zoning, but the hurdles you guys went through to have to build that shouldn't be done. A private developer would not have done it. Exactly. No, well, you not get a return on your investment.
Right. The land sat vacant for 15 years. It was a slab foundation for 15 years because nobody wanted to take the risk on it. But this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about single family zoning. This lot is zoned for single family, for one house. And imagine that if we can fit 8 that look that good on a 3/4 of an acre, like Ryan's saying, what more we can do.
How many bedrooms did you get?
Now you're making me do like complicated
math. It's how many, like,
well, they're
2 bedrooms and the rest ones?
13, 14, 15, like 16.
Okay, yeah. And you're on sewer.
And we're on sewer, right? So that made it feasible financially for us to be able to do. But this, when we talk about eliminating single family zoning or having it be strategically placed in places that are environmentally sensitive, because you have to mitigate the wastewater, you have to mitigate the land use, that's fine. But there are plenty of places where we could do more pocket neighborhoods like this and be able to get
up and down Ridgewood
density.
Avenue, for example, right? Like you could do it up and down that avenue, that same street. You know,
You
like
go down to property
your
with me?
frontage is probably 200 feet, 100 feet of frontage.
No, exactly.
long
No, you're
road,
right.
right?
You're right on the sidewalk. Yeah, and it's
You know,
Who you have living there is a pilot and a nurse and a
an engineer.
I mean, it's gonna be those year-round jobs. It's people who.
Yeah. We also have, so we have two
Housing market
affordable
otherwise.
units in the complex. One of them went to a homeless vet man who's literally living in his car right now for the past 6 months and literally homeless. So we're allowing dogs. We have a little dog park there. There's enough room for a little dog park on 3/4 of an acre, which is crazy to think about. We would never allow that here in Orleans, right? But we should.
well, Orleans is one of the better ones. So let's not.
It is. No,
disparage that town.
okay, I know I'm being
they're
harsh
doing
on
a
my
good
town,
job. They're
but
doing a much better job.
yeah, they're
So
But
more
what I'm saying
flexibility.
about that is, like, we're celebrating 8 units there, right? And we think it's like a major accomplishment that we just got 8 units built, right? Like that should not be a major accomplishment. No offense, Alyssa, right?
no,
Like,
I'm not
that
offended.
shouldn't be a
I'm
major
with you.
accomplishment. We should have one of those finished a month,
Exactly.
not once every 3 years.
And we could do it if the zoning was right. That there would be developers that would come in and take the risk on the land, but nobody, the hearings we had to go through and the legal issues we had to go through and the process we had to go through, it took 2 years. Like, who's going to buy a piece of land and hold it for 2 years? And the margin on this is skinny. I mean, we're not making money, but we're doing it because it's our mission. A developer's not going to spend the 2 years and the legal costs and the going through and the round and around, right? To get the agreement, to get it started, to get the construction costs to go up. We have to make the pathway easier so that the market can respond accordingly.
Yeah, more flexibility, not just in the zoning, but I think that empowerment at the local board level really has to happen as well, where you start from a point of way to say yes to these projects and empowering the people who are going to be building them to show models and templates of what desirable projects look like. Because I think that a lot of times time is wasted in this back and forth process at the local level of, no, we don't like this piece or that piece, or and where you could have a very viable project, it gets picked apart, and there's a lot of, I mean, we talk about NIMBYism, another, the not in my backyard syndrome. And last week on our podcast, Steph Cox of Nexus Works put it very well. I thought that it's much easier to say no and tear something down than it is to think positively about how you can build a better community in the long term.
Yeah.
And not only that, when you
the long term on these boards and committees, and the best way to be that person is to join the board or the committee.
For sure.
But not only that, it's also like, show up when something good's happening, right? Like, so many times the only people that take the time to show up are the people that don't like what's going on. And we all get into this, right? We all get into this on social media or at a public meeting or anywhere, talking about what we don't like. Let's talk about what we do like.
Yeah. So looking ahead to, 5-10 years from now, I know there's a lot of immediate actions. I mean, I feel like you've both given great examples of how just even in the last few years, with building this great new pocket neighborhood that's just been put together by HAC, the rental conversion program to convert seasonal rentals to year round. We didn't get too much into that. Down payment assistance, the ADU bylaws, there's been so much incremental progress. But when you look ahead to the next 5 years, what do you see as our biggest pieces that need to move? What are we facing as a community to really see some forward momentum on this issue of housing?
I think what Alyssa talked about is people shifting their thinking, right? We've got to just shift the thinking from protecting what we have. And I get it. This is hard. And this is how I describe it to people, is that no one wants anything to change. Like, they bought their house where they bought it because they liked everything around it, and they liked the town, and they liked the area and all this. but nothing's going to stay the same forever. Nothing will. So if you buy into that, then you buy into things will change. Now you can say, well, change can either be bad or good. Now, if we can all agree that we do want good change, that everyone wants change, knows things will change, so they want good change, then once you've agreed that you want good change, we can have a conversation about what good is, what better is. And at least now we're all going the same direction. And what I want over the next 3 to 5 years is a reckoning on the Cape of realizing change will happen. We all want good change. Let's talk about what that good change will look like. I think we're still have our heads in the sand, believing that that's 2002 and not 2020, and don't know where the last 18 years went. And we think that we can keep the same forever. And so we need to realize that we all want better. We all will have change, and how we get to that better change. Let's have that reckoning and have that conversation over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with what Ryan's saying. So I live in Orleans, and something as simple as sidewalks is like a big controversial topic. And several years ago, there was a listening session that our select board put on, and people came in and talked about why they wanted them or why they didn't want them. And a lot of people standing up saying, I wanted to stay the same. I came here as a kid and I wanted to look the same and feel the same. I want it to be my Cape Cod, and a sidewalk will just ruin that. Go to New Jersey if you want a sidewalk. And this woman, I'm exaggerating, but she was like 102. She stood up and she lived at the end of Beach Road, and she said, I have been coming here since I was 2. And I live here, I've lived here year round since, I don't know what, like, the 40s or 50s, something. And I used to have to I had to park my horse and walk down to our camp because there were no paved roads. So don't talk to me about wanting things to stay the same. It's changing. Get with the times. It's gonna keep changing. You have to stay with it. And I think that, to Ryan's point of being proactive, the Cape is changing. Our community is changing. Our housing stock is changing. We have to be engaged and we have to be proactive. When I think about for me, it's a two-pronged approach of what would I want the housing market to look like and our community engagement to look like. It's, yes, the diversification of the type of housing that we have. So looking at form-based code, paying attention to what the outside looks like, not mattering what happens on the inside. I think we as a community need to care what it looks like, right? We want it to fit into our culture and our community, much like Ridgewood. We wanted it to look beautiful and fit in, but don't worry about how many bedrooms and how many people and what's happening. The infrastructure is there. We can handle it. Think about changing the single family zoning to form-based code, and thinking about a holistic approach to the types of housing that we have to meet the needs of the population that we have. A large retiree, young professionals we need to seek out. Being more hospitable to people that are a different race, being more hospitable to our Wampanoags who have, our original people. So thinking holistically about the types of housing. But on the other side of the equation is the affordability, right? We can't give everybody a pay raise. That would break our businesses. But can we as towns and as a community think about helping to bridge that affordability gap? When we know that healthcare is one of the largest employers and nursing homes are a component of that. So our CNAs are making what, $12, $13, $14 an hour? They can't afford to live here and service the people. So you need to make about $25 an hour minimum to be able to afford a place if you can find one here. Are there things that we as a community can help bridge the gap for the workforce and the people that we want to live here, that contribute to our community and to our economy, and to make this, again, a year-round community that we want to protect and preserve and really help thrive? So when I think of housing, it's two pieces, right? Like, we need more inventory, we need the diversity, but we also need to be thinking about attracting and retaining people that need to work here and that can work here and help us all through different types of funds, like you're saying, you know, first time home buyer, but are there rental subsidies? Are there other things that we can do to engage our community?
Right, because this is, I love the way you put it, that it's bridging that gap. This isn't a subsidy in the traditional sense. It's not, you know, a support program the way you might think of it. This has to do with bridging the gap between what our major industries are here, and they are healthcare, construction,
right,
retail, and hospitality, and then education to a, you know, a lesser extent, I think, but still very far up there in like the top 5, I believe. And those professions are not going to make, you know, what it requires.
$100,000 a year. Right.
Yeah,
Not,
to
and that's
own a home
fine.
here.
Right.
Yeah. And so if we want them here, we have to do what it takes to attract and keep them. And a lot of times I think that there is a generational line, there are class lines, there are racial lines that all of this falls along that make it an even more complex issue. And I love your point about, you know, really looking toward the ultimate vision of the community that you want to have, and centering that on inclusivity and making sure that we have this great mix and composition of ages and races and experiences, because that's what makes a community really vibrant.
Right.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I like to end our conversations, that we have got to wrap up on a positive note. If we could say one thing to our young working age adult community, which is who CCYP focuses on in our work, about housing policy and advocacy on the Cape, what would it be?
Do you want the people that have housing that think that it's not a problem, and those that are living in the last house they'll probably ever live in, to be making the decision about the housing choices you have in the future?
That's good. Say that again, Ryan. No, because I started to talk
it, for those that are listening, just back it up a few minutes and you can hear it again.
No, I interrupted you in the very beginning, so I want you to.
Okay.
It's poignant.
If you want, go ahead and just continue to do what you're doing. If you want those who have housing, who aren't worried about finding housing, who are living in the last house they'll ever live in, to make the housing decisions for you, continue doing what you're doing. If not, get engaged. You know, show up to a planning board meeting, ask people how you can affect housing change in your community. Alisa and I probably have a ton of ideas depending on what town you live in. You know, get on a board or a commission that actually makes a difference. There's too many boards or commissions that don't actually affect change, right, and there's ones that actually make a difference. And so really do that, and show up at the town meeting. It's a simple thing you can do.
Yeah, I would echo what Ryan said, and just add, you know, dream big. And you know, if we have to be part of the solution and be the change that we want, and the change happens on the planning boards and running for select board and, you know, the ZBA. And I know it's dreadful and boring, but that's where we need people to show up. So get off the nonprofit boards, honestly, and spend the time trying to get on a town committee. That's where, if you want to make a difference.
Unless you're on the CCYP board, the HAC board, or the Cape Cod Association Realtors board, then we love you and want to keep you on our boards.
Yeah. No, but, you know, dream big and get involved.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, one of the things that we talked about in our episode last week was how this intimidation factor prevents young people from taking a seat at the table at these board and committee level discussions. You know, there's a fear of not knowing enough, but you have to know that they will train you, you will learn. And a lot of times that fresh set of eyes is exactly what's needed, because we don't want to keep doing what we've been doing. What we've been doing is decades old strategy that is rooted in all kinds of systemic discrimination and issues that have, you know, really no application to the current generation and what the living style and everything that we're facing. today is all about. So we need to really re-examine a lot of what this is and try to dig our way out of this.
And even the changes that the Cape's tried to make over the last 15, 20 years, right? I see a lot of regurgitation of the same policies they've tried to have over the last 15 or 20 that haven't moved the needle, that haven't made change. And I say, you know what? Your housing strategy is not working. Like those that have been trying, it's not working. So let's try a different approach. Let's do a different strategy that may actually make it work.
Yeah, and neither is the environmental strategy. That's not working either. I mean, our environment is a mess, right? So how can the two come together and be aligned on a path forward? So I would say, you know, no one needs to be an expert. People just need, your lived experience makes them an expert in telling their story and the impact that living here has. And I think that, you know, we're seeing that right with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We need to hear the lived experience of real people. And that's going to help. People will listen. People want to listen, and that will help shape policy.
Yeah. So show up, get involved, participate. Yeah, I love it. All great messages. So we'll share, of course, resources, links directly to each of your organizations. Is there anything else that you'd like to point people to in the way of resources or additional info on what we've talked about today?
No, I mean, if you have a link to, we have our housing study. I don't know if people want to read it, but, you know, it gives more background and information. You know? But, you know, reach out. I think that any of our organizations, we're very much aligned on, you know, training people and getting people ready to go out and talk about housing or talk about childcare, or talk about the issues that are important to our agency. So reach out to any of us, really, I think is the only thing to say.
Great. How about you, Ryan? Any other?
I mean, that's it too. I think, you know, CCYP's driven this conversation for so long that, you know, I'm so glad that the organization drives it forward too, because they're the ones that got this conversation started on the Cape.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the thing we keep coming back to, whether it's housing, childcare, you know, getting more involved, it's all, you know, showing up, being part of the conversation, digging in, because the community will be what you put into it.
You make it. Yep.
So, yeah. Well, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time. Enjoyed chatting with you as always, and we look forward to hopefully a next follow-up conversation at some point. There's lots more to say on housing.
Yeah.
I know I'll talk about it all day, but thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time.